In our video today, we're going to be talking a little bit about dry brushing as well as doing brickwork in painting. Right now I'm just laying down a base color for the brick, lighter tone, because we're going to go in with a little bit of a darker red and browns later on. And I'm filling in as much of the background behind all of the main imagery first, just so that we know later we're going to have things on top. The windows are going to appear more on top of everything, and then the floral parts as well are going to be on top. And I'm starting to do a bit of dry brushing. I'm using a round tip brush. It's a brush that is a little bit more of a point to it. It might spread out and create more of a flared out dry brush, which might be something that you want to do, but I like a little bit more control over it. And the way I usually do it, it's exactly what it sounds like, but if you haven't tried it before, the best way to do a dry brush technique is to have a little bit of paper towel or something for you to dry your brush on, dabbing your brush into the paint and just gently removing a bit of it until you have just enough on your brush. And you can experiment with this, just have a little bit on your brush, enough to get that kind of rough texture that you're looking for, because that's really what you want to use your dry brush for, is to get that texture. And that's what I wanted to go for with the brick, because it's got that kind of roughness to it, so we're expressing that visually through a painting technique. Adding a bit more shadow, more browns and things. And you don't have to do, if you're doing something like brickwork, don't feel like you have to do every single brick. That's going to be not only very time consuming, but visually overstimulating every single little brick. When we look at the world around us, we don't see every individual brick. We kind of just see things in our peripheral vision. We see a wall as one whole brick wall, not as all these little parts. And it can be sort of overwhelming in a painting, because it's not the same. What we're trying to do with a painting is we try to represent how we see the world with our eyes. So I'm trying to get a little bit of a highlight into the windows here, the parts that are not open anyways. The parts where the girls are kind of hanging out the window are open, obviously. And throwing in a bit of that white highlight just sets off all of the dark tones as well. We're getting a bit more browns and things in here too. Just adding a bit of a shadow on the front door. And now I'm getting into the black of the windows and the framing of the door. And when you're using something like this, now that we've done all of this base color, we've done the backgrounds or the main part of the brick wall, when you're doing something with your black there, you want to kind of have a transition. You want to make sure you're covering up any white that you've left from that dry brushing, because dry brushing doesn't always cover everything. So when you go over with your dry brushing, you're going to cover up a lot of those edges. So just keep that in mind, that you're not making your edges too short, because then you're gonna have to make like if you were gonna do these windows, you'd have to make them quite a lot thicker than you're expecting. So make sure that you've pushed those colors in far enough, or that you're willing to widen up your window frames enough to cover up those areas that the dry brushing hasn't covered. And the nice thing about dry brushing is that instead of trying to blend things with blending techniques, you're kind of just brushing a color over another color. And where those colors interact with each other, where the dry brushing has occurred and you get that texture movement, that's where you're getting your color transition rather than blending. And I'm just trying to get I was trying to get the right green here, because this is going to be a lighter green that, as you can see, then I go in and I start to add a bit of a darker green to emphasize the highlights. With something like shrubbery, I find that I tend to do better. Well, I think that's the way I did with the brick as well. The anything I'm doing, I'm starting with a lighter color and I go in darker, and you don't have to do it that way. That's just my personal technique. If you're using these videos as an educational tool, you can follow along with that. There are tons of videos out there, other sources of information where I would assume that if you're someone who is more interested in working from dark to light, then that would be really helpful. But comment below and let me know if you want me to try a video in the future, maybe where I start from dark and I bring up the colors. The great thing about gouache is that you can go over top. It's quite opaque when it's applied thickly. You can make it more of a wash by mixing it with water, but when you put it on kind of thicker, it can actually cover over black quite nicely. And actually there is, coming up ahead here, there is a part where I make a little bit of a mistake with my lighter color, and I end up going over and fixing it. Just adding a bit more detail to the figures now. And I tried to keep the figures, their color scheme, I'm trying to keep it matching the rest of the image. If I decided all of a sudden to give one of the girls like a blue shirt, I'd have this random blue color. So when you're working on something like a painting or any sort of artistic endeavor, just try and keep in mind that you want to keep things, I think that you should keep things within a specific color palette. And your color palette can be really broad, it can just be rainbow, but if you have very similar colors, a very similar color palette, and then you throw in a random color or colors, it kind of throws the whole thing off. But you can always make those colors work, but you have to bring them into other parts of the painting, or as I say, you have to bring them around the painting and not just have them in a singular area or areas. Just try and make it all a cohesive painting. Adding a little bit of dry brushing onto the figure and putting some flowers in. Just simple little flowers. I ended up not liking the pink as much, so I actually went back in and I made them red, because there's more red in this image than pink. We were talking about doing colors that all matched each other before. And here's where I made a little mistake. I just went back in and just touched it up, just fixed it. And that is the painting. I rounded my edges with a bit of tape because I like the idea of having a little bit of a rounder edge. That's just a style choice, not for any real reason. And of course, you always have to sign your paintings at the end. Make sure you do that. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Comment below and let me know what you want me to paint next. Bye-bye.